Hello, it's Scott Manley here with another part of Interstellar Quest. We're going to be tying up all the loose ends. You might have seen a live stream which I did where I covered landing on Tylo. Well, this is of course the Draco, which had been stuck in orbit after its long mission. It had been infected by the Nan plague. Not a number, does not compute, breaks things. In fact, it had infected all its fuel systems. And using the good old-fashioned Pardo push, we had put it onto an orbit, an eccentric orbit, which would graze through the atmosphere, and therefore I was hoping that I would be able to land it. So this is me trying to bring it down. Now you see that the periaps, the initial periaps, is roughly over the equator. And I want to bring this down. Obviously, I want to keep it between about 30 and 40 kilometers, right? And this is why I'm flipping the thing upside down, angling it downwards so that the bottom of the aircraft pushes it down and stops the natural tendency of its orbital velocity to lift it back up higher into the atmosphere. So I'm just tuning this and watching my vertical speed as I'm bleeding off energy here. Now, I'm obviously also going to have to look for a place to safely land this thing. And if I judge this just right, I should be able to get over the poles. We are in a highly eccentric orbit, but you can see that I'm going to miss the polar ice cap by a bit. So I take a little roll over to the right and start trying to adjust my trajectory to bring it down in the correct direction. You can see it's starting to turn very slowly, bringing it over the large white area at the South Pole, which is thankfully largely flat. Albeit there are a few mountains and hazards to avoid, but I do a pretty good job of getting myself lined up. So that's where we're aiming for. The trick is now to make sure that we have bled off enough energy and can control it and turn myself around and commit to a graceful landing on the ice. Now, believe it or not, in real life you can actually get flat, large areas of ice, which are okay for aircraft to land on in Antarctica, and they use these. They're called blue ice airfields, I believe. Now, what happens is the mountains in Antarctica, they can adjust the airflow, and in particular, there are areas in Antarctica which are so dry because the mountains have basically captured all the snow, and by the time the wind gets over them, there's no moisture in it. Now, add to that enough winds, prevailing winds to keep the areas clean, and you can get large flat areas that are kind of eroded continuously until they're flat, or at least flat enough that they can operate wheeled aircraft from them. Near the coast of Antarctica, there's also the ice airfield near McMurdo Base, I believe, and that comes up every year when there's enough sea ice. They clear out an area and use that as a runway, and they'll land aircraft on it too to supply the base. Anyway, we're starting to reach the edge of the ice cap, and so it's time to perform a U-turn. I just passed over the pole, so I'm going to try and aim to get as close to the pole as possible. Now, on a more temporary basis, the McMurdo base I read about, they also have an ice airfield that they operate during the Antarctic winter. They have to have it's on the sea, it's basically sea ice, which is sufficiently cleared and flat enough that they can use it to land wheeled aircraft on. But the interesting thing, I guess I read, is that when they land the aircraft, and they have to park them while they're unloading them, they have sensors set up that show if the aircraft is adjusting and sinking, because the wheels will slowly sink into the ice. And if they sink more than about 10 inches, then it gets to the point where they might actually have trouble getting out of the holes that they've cut for themselves. So they have the sensor set up, and if they move too far, then they move them to another spot, and they'll keep on doing it while the aircraft is there. Anyway, I have performed my big movement. I've turned through 180 degrees. I'm still over the mountains. You can see the ridges here, and because we are near to the pole, those ridges are actually quite exaggerated. They're very steep, they're very small. Very small features change very, very rapidly. This is a standard feature of poles in Kerbal space program because of the way the PQS system uses a cylindrical terrain map wrapped onto a spherical surface, meaning the poles are all warped. It does, however, appear that I have sufficient altitude and speed to get over the edge of these mountains and over to the flat area ahead. Obviously, if I didn't, I would be doomed, because I don't even have any RCS thrusters on this. It has no engines of its own. It's now completely dead. flying through the sky with a super high-tech fusion reactor which no longer works. Okay, 140 meters per second, and now we're starting to begin to flare out a little. So raising my nose so that my descent speed drops below about 5 meters per second, and bingo, touchdown! And we only lost one tiny little piece of the aircraft. Of course, we will now need to sanitize it to remove all hint of NAN infection. Anyway, the next thing I had going was, of course, the Tylo-bound interplanetary lab. Obviously, I originally wanted to go everywhere else, but I decided to take it just to Tylo because everybody really just wants to see everyone saying, get on with it! So yeah, this was a live stream which I figured I would do because it was just around the 100th episode or thereabouts, give or take a few. Obviously, this is running at 4 times regular speed, and you can see me intensely concentrating in the bottom right-hand corner. Of course, if you want to see the actual live stream and hear all the comments to the people that were there, then you can do that. But yes, we landed on the surface of Tylo, and we collected all the sciences. And then I went off, had a bit of a rest, Valentine's Day, and got sick. And got sick, and got sick, got better, and decided I better continue this whole series. So yes, I returned to the game, and it's time to get the team back together. City Kerman throttles up the fusion engine and starts launching towards orbit of Tylo. Now, of course, he wants to try and at least make a decent attempt at matching the inclination of the target object, so he's using the nav ball markers. We've targeted the object in orbit to make sure that we end up in the same plane as it. Except that I foolishly got everything back to front, and of course need to turn all the way over and start firing in the opposite direction. It's good this spacecraft has copious amounts of delta V, enabling it to make such mistakes with impunity, nothing more than a little bit of embarrassment. Certainly no mission-dooming consequences as a result of this. Oh, nice view on the way up there. I like flying away from sights on the planets and being able to look down and see it below me. There's something. I think it lends the game a great deal of scale. Let's say, even although it's 1/10 of regular scale, it's still pretty cool to be able to do that. Okay, and we're almost up to orbital velocity. Now it's just a case of matching orbits. And in this case, I decided it was just easiest to match orbits out at Apoapс and then very aggressively pretty much head straight towards the target. Now, of course, that a huge amount of delta V only applies to the fusion engine. It does not apply to the reaction control system, which I need to use for final rendezvous. We cannot use the fusion drive when we are within 2.5 kilometers off the target. Otherwise, we will irradiate everyone involved and give them a couple of extra heads, which might offset our mass calculations a little. Then again, if you've got 2 heads, then you probably want to be using the improbability drive instead. And I believe the consequences of using an unshielded improbability drive are a little stranger than growing extra heads, limbs, and tumours. Anyway, regardless, the plan is to get to just outside the magic 2.5 death barrier limit, and then drop my velocity down to about 10 meters per second. And from there, I will move in very, 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 very carefully and tediously and slowly, using a time acceleration to at least make the whole thing a little more careful, a little more bearable, sorry, and then I'll hopefully be able to dock the whole thing. As I approached the lab, it turned out that I had to fly down the length of the spacecraft, which let me leisurely view this, this beauty pass, let's say, of the spacecraft. Of course, this is running at 4 times regular speed, which accounts for the nice, smooth frame rate, because without that, it would be horrifically slow. Look at it there, the very definition of majesty. All the power in the rear, all the science in the front, and some squishy stuff up there as well. Yeah, this is the pinnacle of exploration technology. Assuming we forget about that whole yogurt warp drive capable spacecraft. Turns out after its first test trip, they decided to take the Yoger back to the lab to upgrade it, make it a little more capable. Its range wasn't quite what people expected. Its landing characteristics weren't satisfactory, and ultimately it wasn't really interstellar capable. We still have to unlock that feature as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, we bring this back safely, and now we have to head off towards another target. So yeah, we light up the main drive system, and for about 5 minutes I was firing the engines and wondering why it was flexing so much, and why I didn't seem to be going anywhere. I was worried we were going to have another NAN incident. Let's switch back to old me to find out what was discovered. Okay, so I'm seeing 297 kilonewtons. I'm generating that specific impulse. It's solid. It's not flamed out or anything. We've got fuel, we've got tritium. That is very strange. Oh, yes, that would explain a lot of things. Yes, when you've got multiple engines, try to make sure they're at least firing in the same direction. Oh, how I laughed when I discovered that. Of course, you don't want to hear me laugh because I've got it all time accelerated and it would just sound like the maniacal goblin or something like that. Anyway, yeah, firing up the engines, of course, finally getting moving. We increase our velocity till we are able to escape from the sphere of influence of Tylo. Now, we had another spacecraft coming in that was going to arrive and land at Paul. However, this thing happens to be on the scene. It happens to have plenty of fuel, and to be honest, it's going to take me less time to get it there than it is to get one of those old low-tech spacecraft using ye old-fashioned fission drives. So the decision is made. Let's head for Paul. Let's find out what we can find out. Let's get the science, plant that flag, and then it will be only Elu left to complete my catalogue. So we follow the same approach as before, going into a capture orbit and then going into an eccentric orbit for the actual landing, trying to minimize the amount of time that I spend faffing around in this very slow and unwieldy spacecraft, and instead concentrate on the far lighter, far more maneuverable lander type spacecraft, which I don't know if we ever came up with a name for this thing. Oh well, it's too late now, but please come up with some suggestions. Technically, we don't even need the spacecraft to land on Paul, because Paul's escape velocity is lower than that of Minmus. On the other hand, we would like to bring all the scientific gear down just for bragging rights. We want to, of course, collect science from everywhere in the solar system so that we can, I don't know, maximize the amount of times we can buffer warp drive or whatever. I mean, that is a key feature of Interstellar mod, is that you can upgrade some of the items by spending science, and that's a one-time spend. You spend the science on it and it gets upgraded, and that version then becomes the better one. But if you ever recover it or destroy it, then you've lost that science forever. In particular, one of the things you can upgrade is the warp drive to advanced field geometry, which makes it more better. I'm not exactly sure what it does, but I'll have that. You can upgrade the computer core to make it an AI, of course, which I have done. That lets it collect more science. And anyway, yeah, we are coming in towards landing very, very rapidly. So I basically dropped down till I was about, just above 1 kilometer, and then fired the engines to very quickly kill my speed. Now I'm just going to drop down slowly onto this surface here. Now this is Paul. It has a very crinkled, crackled surface, and it has these big, spiky, rock-shaped structures sticking up. Of course, those are all just cosmetic. If you fly into them, nothing happens. Well, nothing happens beyond passing through them. You're not going to find your spacecraft destroyed unless you panic. Anyway, science time. You wonder if you can bring back some Paul for your garden on Kerbal. Because I see lots of gardens around Kerbal, right? Okay, and we want... The mystery goo says... The goo starts buzzing like a bumblebee. Bzzz. Yes, it's a bee, not a wasp. We don't like wasps. But bees are nice. Observe the materials bay. Some of the samples have shriveled up. Okay, now on to seismic data. After squinting at the device, you can still see vibrations from your landing on the moon, circling the very tiny globe. Obviously, atmosphere scan doesn't work. Landing on the planet is allowed for highly detailed scans of the interior. Who cares? The temperature varies from one rock formation to another. They must conduct heat differently. Yes, they must. Anyway, time for a quick jaunt around the surface. And Sidzi makes a pivotal discovery. He has discovered the material, the unobtainium, that is required for antimatter. Yes, that warp drive they've been building hasn't quite performed as they have expected, but I'm sure with the understanding of anti-gravity, they will unlock truly interstellar capabilities on their spacecraft. We've found the secret of anti-gravity! Now we can build a real interstellar capable warp drive. Yes, because obviously that's what I was waiting for, right? We needed to finish off some of the other exploration before we could really head off to other star systems. Had to finish off all my other missions. Looking at the jagged rocks, you feel very thankful about not landing on them, even though they just look jagged. As you pick up the samples, your eyes start to water. Thinking it would be not good to sneeze in your suit, you put them back down very quickly. I would not be surprised if there are people that would suffer from moon dust allergies. So, with the information that will unlock the true power of the warp drive finally in our hands, the time has come to put a call out to Kerbal astronauts everywhere. We have the one important mission that we have been waiting for. Up in high orbit, we have a pair of Kerbals manning the reactor control room. It's time for them to come home and be part of this mission, a mission which is more important than anything that has ever been done by Kerbal society, more ambitious, more groundbreaking, or space-breaking as the case may be, space warping really. Yes, Herimon and Arik Kerman are gonna head back. They didn't have much to play, much of a role in this series, but they are going to be part of the grand exodus beyond the place that we call home. This is our most ambitious mission yet. We need all hands on deck. We all need everyone to come with us. Everyone, at least, that is qualified. Back when these guys started their career, they were using good old-fashioned chemical rockets, and indeed, chemical rockets is what they're using to get home. None of these fancy space planes with, nuclear-based engines. No, these are burning straight-up chemicals. Chemical reactions exploding through a nozzle into the vacuum to supply thrust. Isn't that way more raw and primal than perhaps physically manipulating the curvature of space-time like that seatbelt appears to be doing there next to him? That is a minor bug that needs fixed, by the way, devs. When you have one or two Kerbals in the three-man pod, they should call the window seats rather than the terrible seat in the middle with absolutely no visibility. I mean, sure, Jebediah was always in the middle, but it doesn't make so much sense anymore now that he is truly confirmed to be badass rather than simply oblivious to the dangers around him. So who else have we in low Kerbin orbit? Yeah, well, we have Dancy Kerman, who's been studying this giant rock for the last few months. Well, his ride is here too, and he's of course taking it. He's the only one here, in fact, because his associate, the person that was assigned to work with him, the Kerbal, he had to go off chasing after this rogue space capsule in the Claw, the Grabber, and he is currently docked at the low Kerbin orbit Skylab 1 thing, Space Lab 1. Well, looks like Dancy Kerman actually did a better job at landing close to the space center compared to his friends. Finally, in low Kerbin orbit, we have Dildred, Lars, and Frank Kerman. Yeah, we also have Lanber Kerman. Unfortunately, we have only room for 3, so he doesn't get to go on the voyage. There's also that other problem of him being possessed by some sort of alien mind tech controlling technology thing that made him do crazy things. So we don't trust him, and we're not going to take him in our super high-tech warp ship. But that will be in the next episode. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.